It's recording, but she didn't announce it. She didn't say anything in the recording.
Okay.
Just shouting out something. She doesn't see.
Yeah, you want someone else about opening the sutra? Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me online? Okay. So I've lost track. What day of the retreat are we? This is Thursday. Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to talk about the alchemical vessel of Zen today. And it's the way that we transmute suffering into compassion, really. And, alchemical vessels are supposed to change lead into gold. So you put all your stuff in there, all your shit, stir it around, all your stuff, all your suffering. And it's really good fertilizer, and you stir that, cut up all the food and onions and potatoes, and you just cook that thing till you have a really good stew of life. So I think it would be helpful in talking about this to use the three tenets to appreciate this in the context of the three tenets, which pretty much cover all the ground. And so if we start with not knowing, the last talk I gave was really about prajna and shunyata, or emptiness, and really not knowing is the perceiving what is here already, which is that the teaching of emptiness. Perceiving what's here is that everything is interconnected, and that we ourselves are part of this web that is woven together with everything. And so prajna, the literal meaning of prajna is before knowing. So prajna is not knowing. And so it helps to start with wisdom. I'm going to talk a lot about compassion today, but we really emphasize wisdom a lot in Zen training. Compassion without wisdom is not very effective, actually, as a skillful means. But wisdom without compassion is also not of much use to anybody, kind of a dead thing. So we need them both. And when you put them together, you come up with an alchemical vessel I'm going to talk about today. So we start with wisdom, and then we move into bearing witness through beginning to cultivate an aspirational energy and practicing precepts, paramitas, or Brahma Viharas. And that the dividing line between bearing witness and compassion is really hard to find. I think they just move into each other. And so I'm basically today talking about bearing witness and loving action. But let's start with some wisdom. There's case 80 from the Shoyoroku. Ruge passes the chin rest. And I'm going to skip there's preludes and verses and poems that go with these koans, so I'm just going to give you the case. Attention. Ruge asks Suibi, what is the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West? You know, this is a stock question in Buddhism. It means, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of Zen? What's the meaning of Buddhism? Why are we doing this? What's the meaning of the patriarch is Bodhidharma? So what's the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West? And Suibe said, go and get the chin rest for me. Ruge brought the chin rest for Suibe, and Suibe then treated him to a blow with the chin rest. Wow, bang. Ruge remarked, hit me if you like, but there is still no meaning to the patriarchs coming from the West. Later, Ryuge went to Rinzai, and he asked Rinzai, what's the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West? And Rinzai said, go get that cushion for me. Ryuge brought the cushion to Rinzai, and Rinzai hit him with the cushion. And Ryuge remarked, hit me if you like, but there's still no meaning to the patriarchs coming from the West. Later, when Ryuge was living in his own temple, a monk asked him, said, Osho, in former times, I heard that you asked Suibe and Rinzai about the meaning of the coming of the patriarch from the West. Did they clarify anything for you? Ryuge said, yes, they clarified it all right, but there's still no meaning to the patriarchs coming from the West. So we have the same case in the Blue Cliff record. It's not quite as long, they cut off parts of it. And in the Blue Cliff record, he sort of sounds like he's a kind of, not too sharp. Because, after you do the first question and you get hit by your teacher, you're not going to ask the same question again unless you're an idiot. Like, clearly, he's not an idiot, right? He's more like the court jester in the palace, right? He knows what he's doing. So some tenacity or some patience, some chutzpah, right? We have a lot of koans that start with the question, why? Why did Bodhidharma come from the West? And then you come up with you find a meaning. You reach up and you find a meaning for why Bodhidharma came from the West. He wanted to see what was on the other side of the hill. Why? And why always begs of because. Got to be followed by because. But as soon as you speak in that way, you're already some distance from the moment. aren't we? So there are koans, quite a few. Why does Bodhidharma have no beard? That's a koan. And then you work on it, and the first thing that comes into your head is because. And then you're already lost. You're not even in the ballpark anymore. You're wandering because he has a red beard. All the pictures show Bodhidharma. Why didn't he have a red beard? Because. Why doesn't seem to be very helpful? Why did 6 million Jews get killed in the Holocaust? I've been to Auschwitz twice. I ask myself that question many times. Why do children get shot in schools? Why? Why do teenagers take their lives? Why? Is there a because? Is that helpful? Why? If you're a religious person, you might ask God why. God, why are you allowing all this suffering to take place? Let's say a man has a hard time being in relationship with women. Every relationship he has, it goes south. Sooner or later, it doesn't work out. He goes to therapy, does therapy, then he discovers his mother was abusive, and he gets a label for it, for his condition. Okay, that's useful to know psychologically if we have parents that weren't so skillful. What parents are perfect anyway? What parents ever raise their kids without making any mistakes? Any parents here that have been perfect? Oh. So hey, here's a grown man. He's like in his mid-30s. The parents, the mother did the job. Maybe she didn't do a very good job, but at least he survived his teenage years. And it's so asking, he could say, why was my mother like that? And yes, she was, but the why is sort of passing responsibility for his own misery onto his mother. If you want to know the meaning of Zen, first of all, don't ask why. Begin with yourself. Begin with your own suffering. Begin with your own mind, your own heart. Ruge's no meaning is kind of like the koan mu, isn't it? It's like hitting a brick wall. What do you do with mu? What's the meaning of mu? Your conceptual mind can't do anything with it, right? This is wisdom. This is how we learn about wisdom. It's not an intellectual concept. It's how we're living, how we're actually living our lives. So it's not nihilistic. No meaning is life. No meaning is a 5-year-old with cancer. There's no meaning to that. So really get no meaning. This is wisdom. This is what I was talking about the other day. You're liberated from life and death. You're liberated You're liberated. You're liberated from delusion and enlightenment. You're liberated from heroes and villains, angels and demons, good and bad, right and wrong. Prajna doesn't discriminate, doesn't pick and choose. So if you have if you have this wisdom, have it. If you are doing prajna paramita, then you can go anywhere. So that's the beginning of putting yourself in the vessel. And now the bearing witness comes. And this is really much of the heart of our practice, is the bearing witness. It's how we cook the soup, how we cook everything. We put everything in the vessel. Everything. We don't pick and choose. I like this potato better than that one. You just put them all in. This potato doesn't look very good. Put it in. Bearing witness is really about beginning to cultivate bodhicitta, our awakened heart. It begins with a kind of aspirational energy to stay long enough to bear witness to what's here. The not knowing gets us on the cushion, and then the bearing witness is we stay. We stay in whatever the situation is. There are many upayas in Buddhism and in Zen. Mind training is one of them. The paramitas is a upaya that we teach in the Zen Life series. Paramitas are the practices of a bodhisattva. We also have what are called the 4 Brahma Viharas, which is a wonderful way, which I like to talk about today, which is a way of cultivating compassion and learning how to bear witness, how to really cook the soup well, cook everything. Bear witness to the joys and sorrows of life, all of it. Again, we're not picking and choosing. Bear witness to what shows up in our life. And whatever shows up is what shows up. But compassion doesn't really come unless we are willing to bear witness in this way. Somehow we have to be willing to sit in the fire. And that's not so easy. That takes courage to sit with our suffering. So bearing witness is kind of a commitment you make to show up and to be honest with yourself, to really see through your own capacity for self-deception. And you do that. We do that in this practice. Prajna is a no bullshit meter that keeps you from taking the shortcuts. You know when you've done something fishy. And if you don't, hopefully you have someone around that will tell you as such. Start with wisdom. Smell the water and hear the sound of the flowers. That's wisdom. So this practice of bearing witness, I think, is how we begin to generate the aspiration to live by vow, to live by what we call the Bodhisattva vow. And there are 4 preliminaries in the mind training. We're not doing the mind training as such, but I'm weaving together some of the mind training with the 4 Brahma Viharas. So the first preliminary for this kind of training is to really appreciate the preciousness of our human life. How rare it is. They say in the scriptures, it's like in the middle of the ocean. It's like a sea turtle coming up and happening to hit an inner tube that's floating by. And in the middle of the ocean, it happens to find that inner tube and come up through the inner tube. That's the preciousness of human life. When you think of all the sentient beings on the planet, all the insects and bugs and animals and birds, to be born as a Homo sapien in this body that we have, it's precious. And then on top of that, you've had the good fortune to hear the Buddha Dharma. You've had the good fortune to hear some teachings that are about something true, something important, something ultimately true. And then the second preliminary is to also appreciate the reality of death. We don't know this body that we're in, it's not going to be here forever. We don't know when we're going to die. We could die anytime. Anytime. And the third preliminary is just to appreciate how we are entrapped by karma. We are the product of cause and effect. And much of what we do is going to trap us in a chain of further cause and effect. That's how life is. And then the fourth preliminary is and you won't have a hard time appreciating this, is the inevitability of suffering. The inevitability of your suffering and the suffering of all sentient beings. So this is called taking the attitude of the 4 reminders, the 4 preliminaries. So the 4 Brahma Viharas mean the abodes of Brahma, or the sublime attitudes. And they're also sometimes referred to as the 4 immeasurables. And they are loving kindness, or maitri, compassion, or karuna, empathic joy, or mudita, and equanimity, upekkha. So we start with loving kindness. That's really important, because if we don't start with a good foundation, then compassion can go off and be misunderstood. So we have to start with ourselves. We have to start close at home, start with loving kindness, gentleness towards ourselves. Gentleness. It's easy to be harsh. Even in Zen training, it's easy to be harsh and hard and think, well, I have to be perfect. And you get yelled at by your teacher or somebody, and then you get corrected. Don't do Zen training if you don't want to be corrected. Just don't do it. Don't even start. And then you get corrected, and then you really work hard not to ever get corrected again. You try to be a perfectionist, and it's just, you're miserable. Go ahead and make some mistakes. Go ahead and do it. Do it with confidence. Do it all the way. Don't really make a good mistake. If you do it with confidence, maybe your teacher won't notice. So one slogan that would occur at this point in the mind training is regard all dharmas as dreams. That's wisdom, isn't it? We speak at this point of absolute bodhicitta, which is wisdom. Absolute. Being able to start to purify our mind and not have our thoughts land anywhere is absolute bodhicitta. Just to be here without any expectation, without any thought about what's the outcome. And that's why we do this practice, so we can do this. You can do this right now. You can do it. But if you can't, then we also have another way of doing this practice with relative bodhicitta, where you're doing it in a simpler way. But the best way is absolute bodhicitta. That's why in Zen we emphasize wisdom. The absolute bodhicitta arises from wisdom. Really not knowing. Clearing the deck. And so we're talking about beginning to cultivate an aspirational energy. And I think it's important to distinguish between aspiration and an affirmation. They're not the same. You know, there's always been a lot of talk in the culture about the power of positive thinking. And I'm sure there's benefits to having positive thoughts and changing habits and whatnot, but it's not the same as aspiration. An affirmation is telling yourself you're going to be compassionate, and then you hide the fact that secretly you feel really selfish and not compassionate at all. You feel like a loser, and you hide that. And then you get some religious teaching that says, you should be more compassionate. You should be like Mother Teresa. And then you try to be like Mother Teresa, and then you just hopelessly guilty because no one could possibly be as compassionate as Mother Teresa. So that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about an affirmation. We're talking about an aspiration. And an aspiration is simply your willingness to show up with sincerity and genuineness as you are, with all your warts and neuroses and issues and stuff. Just show up. Be honest. Be straightforward. You don't have to apologize for anything. Just be sincere. Show up. Move closer to what scares you. That's an aspirational energy. You can do this because you've laid the ground for it through the practice of not knowing, through meditation. Meditation is a practice of not knowing. But it's not the end of practice. It's just the foundation. And now, because you have this foundation, you start to notice that you have this sad and tender heart. You have a soft spot. And you've been barricading it and walling it off and defending it and trying to have it all, show everyone you're all together. Everyone smiles on Facebook, so you got to be like that. And you're miserable. You say, everyone's happy on Facebook. How come I'm not? I don't feel like that. And the more you look at Facebook, the more miserable you get because everyone's always showing their best face, how happy they are, smart. No, I'm not like that. So you find that you have this aspirational energy. It's already here. And because you made a commitment to be with yourself in a way that's honest, then what shows up is whatever you're avoiding, whatever you've disowned, it shows up. There's no way it's not going to show up. You've been distracting yourself so it wouldn't show up. Well, Don't start a meditation practice if you don't want to deal with your stuff. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to meditate and be all peaceful, everything's going to be wonderful. I'm going to be enlightened, no more suffering. They talk about the liberation. Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, right. I'm still waiting after 74 years. So having this aspiration allows you to be a bigger container, allows you to be in the vessel, allows you to be in this retreat, allows you to sit and not run away. Even when the sitting is, your legs hurt, you're looking at Jigen to see when she's going to hit the bell. You're looking out of the corner. You don't want to really look because you're not supposed to look around till it's going. And then if she misses a time, then you're looking at her. You're like starting to frown. Like Jigen. So you've put yourself in this container. You chose this. You chose to be in this retreat. So the four immeasurables is a way that we keep company with ourselves on the spiritual journey. And this bodhicitta is really important. It means awakened heart. And without bodhicitta, nothing works. Nothing works at all. Without bodhicitta, we just have a poverty mentality. There's always something missing, something lacking. With bodhicitta, you start to feel okay just the way you are. And you're able to be satisfied with the simple things in life. You don't go looking for so much out there to satisfy you. With bodhicitta, you don't have to earn love. You don't have to earn your worthiness because you're already worthy and it's unconditional. Unconditional. We always feel like we have to earn it. Like we're not good enough. We won't measure up. If someone actually saw me the way I am, oh my God, I wouldn't have any friends. So this is basic loving. I'm not going to go through all the steps of loving kindness practice because I think you all know it. We teach it in our core curriculum. You start with yourself and you have an intention to be with yourself with kindness, a kind heart, an open heart. My life is difficult. This practice is difficult, but I'm gonna be kind to myself and I could even feel some pride and dignity that I'm doing this. You're doing this. How many people do this? So you start to have some sense of your own kindness and lovability, and it's unconditional. And this is really important. It's not a poverty mentality. You don't have to earn this. You don't have to perform rituals perfectly in order to have bodhicitta, your awakened hearts. It's already here. Whether you're a sloppy person or a good, not a sloppy person, everyone has capacity for bodhicitta. Everyone. Even villains. Even demons. We all have demons. Wouldn't be human beings if we didn't. So with bodhicitta, you start to learn how to make friends with your demons. You feed them, you give them what they need. Have a conversation with your demon. Invite him in. Come on in, Mara. Serve you some tea. So the image of Maitri is a mother protecting her young. a mother bird in a nest. Yeah, mother is protecting her young. And you know what? Sometimes one of them falls out of the nest and dies. And you could ask why, but why? That's life. That's nature. Sometimes they fall out of the nest, no matter what the mother does. And what does the mother do? Does she ask why? Does the mother bird stop and ask why? And the answer with, no, she just keeps doing what she's doing. So this first Brahma Vihara is loving kindness, generating kindness towards ourselves, gentleness, like the rain outside today. Like, when we get those snowstorms with the big flakes, kind of just like feathers, that way so beautiful. That kind of gentleness with yourself. We can be really harsh on ourselves, unforgiving. So loving kindness is about beginning to forgive ourselves for all our inadequacies, for all our mistakes, for whatever we've done that has caused suffering for others, beginning to forgive ourselves. And then this leads to the second Brahma Vihara, which is compassion. Now we can start to talk about compassion in a real way, not in some superficial way, not in some religious way where you should be compassionate, but actual real compassion. Your sad and tender heart. And compassion is harder than loving kindness because now you have to be willing to actually be with suffering. It's a further step than loving kindness. You have to be willing to be not only with others, people suffering, but your own as well. This is bearing witness, right? Bearing witness to what you're afraid of, what scares you, anger, sadness, fear. So this aspirational energy naturally leads you into beginning to cultivate compassion, and we can do it through absolute bodhicitta, which is really absolute bodhicitta is when you have wisdom and the wisdom begins to function. That's compassion. Compassion is wisdom functioning in the world because we're naturally compassionate if we have wisdom. We don't have to try to be compassionate. We are naturally generous and kind as we are. So that's absolute bodhicitta. And then, especially in the Tibetan tradition, there's a lot of teachings about relative bodhicitta to help us along, because absolute bodhicitta can be difficult. So we have lots of upayas and teachings about how to do little steps to move towards being more compassionate. So one of the big ones is Tonglen. Doing Tonglen, sending and receiving. So Tonglen is a way of expanding your experience, being a larger vessel. You're going to welcome your demons. You're going to befriend them, get to know them. So with Tonglen, you could, just like with loving kindness, they all have like a 7-step formula, and you always start close to home with these practices. You start with yourself. You start to open your heart and be at home with your sad and tender heart and be okay with it. Oh my gosh. And stop framing it as weakness or some mistake that you're vulnerable. It's a strength. the huge strength, bodhicitta. It can melt ice, melt the ice in your heart, soften you, soften the rough edges. So in Tonglen, this is what we say, when you sit, you have a strong back and a soft front. We need discipline, we need to sit, but we're opening our hearts, we're finding that we have a tender heart. So in Tonglen, it's just the opposite of ego's ego's agenda. So it's a little counterintuitive. So you breathe in what's painful and not wanted, what you don't want, you breathe that in. And you do this with a sincere, again, you do this through an aspirational practice. You do it with an intention, with a sincere wish that you and others will be free of suffering. It's important to do this with intention, not just haphazardly. I mean, you drop your story about the whole thing, and you just, again, this is absolute, you notice this is not knowing. You actually breathe in what you don't want, and you allow it to be here, embodied here in your lived experience, not as a story, but it's just some kind of darkness, something you don't want. You're being a very big container now when you do this. You open your heart, and now you exhale, and you send out what you want, relief from pain. And you send that out with the intention that others will be free of suffering. So the first step in all of the Tonglen practice is always about purifying your mind, which is this something we can't put into words, this wisdom, shunyata, prajna, having a opening, just open and be settled and not open. And in that unconditional moment, then you begin doing the Tonglen practice. So one way of doing, there's many ways to do Tonglen, but one way is just to breathe in what feels claustrophobic, thick, heavy, dark, coal dust, something you definitely don't want to breathe in. Yellow, brown, smog, icky stuff, sticky stuff. Breathe in COVID. Oh my gosh. Breathe in what you don't want. And then you breathe out spaciousness. You breathe out something fresh, something light, something cool, like bright moonlight. You breathe that out. And again, just like in loving kindness practice, you can do this in steps. You can do it for yourself, just generating the aspiration of doing this in a general way. And then you do it, you start close at home, and then you do it for people close to you, your family, people you love, friends, neutral people, and finally people that you really don't like. So that's Tonglen. And when you do this practice, you're being a larger container. Yeah? And then the last couple of steps here, that if you're doing this as a formal practice, is you would generate the aspiration that all those you're working with would dwell in compassion and be free of suffering. And then the final step is extending that aspiration as a bodhisattva vow, that all sentient beings be free from suffering. So then this leads to the third Brahma Vihara, which is empathic joy. And the mind slogan that often goes with this is always maintain only a joyful mind. Not necessarily easy to do, but it's an aspiration. Having an aspiration doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it all the time. But it is your ability and capacity to increase your ability to rejoice at your good fortune and at the good fortune of others. So again, I can't stress enough how important in bodhicitta it is to ground this in loving kindness towards yourself. This doesn't work if you start with some harshness towards yourself. It'll just be a way of beating yourself up, and that's not what this practice is. It'll be a way for you to go missing, and that is not going to work. You're going to get burnt out doing that kind of practice. So you start always in each of these steps, you start with finding your capacity to have joy. And maybe it's in small things, the small mundane things. Joy in how you arrange the pots and pans in the kitchen. Joy in how you clean a room or put your shoes by the door. Joy in small things, small details. And there's a saying by Long Chengpa about all these four Brahma Viharas. He says, let the flower of compassion blossom in the rich soil of Maitri, or loving kindness, and water it with the good water of equanimity in the cool, refreshing shade of joy. Joy is a little different than happiness. Joy is more sustainable. Happiness can be ephemeral. You know, you can be happy, I don't know, happiness, we have happiness because our sense pleasures, and there's nothing the matter with happiness, but just if we think happiness is going to lead to some ultimate fulfillment, then we're likely to be disappointed, because you can't maintain happiness all the time. It's just not, you can't do it. So in our core curriculum, we use the two Greek terms for this, hedonia and eudaimonia. And the Greeks use the term hedonia to refer to the happiness that comes from sense pleasures. Eating a good meal is hedonia, good. All the sense pleasures are wonderful, but they don't fulfill in any sustainable way. So then the Greeks used the term eudaimonia, which means to thrive, to live a meaningful life, to live a life that is committed to wisdom. And something that's ultimately true and meaningful is eudaimonia. And that leads more to what we would say joy. Joy is the ability to rejoice in small victories, small things for yourself, for others, for tortillas, for bread that didn't rise. Oh, the butter on that was so good. Oh, that was joy. Oh, that was joy, man. That thing looked like a brain that had fallen on, gotten fried and somewhere, but boy, was it good. So joy is, to rejoice in small things. And there's so many that we miss all day long that we could be actually celebrating and finding joy in little things. But we're so busy looking somewhere else. We miss what's important. We miss it. And that's why retreat is so wonderful, because you can get this. I think you can all get what I'm talking about here. Joy in little things, vase of flowers, a cup of tea. Stop picking and choosing. You've made your commitment, so just show up. Nothing is lacking. Nothing. Knowing how to be satisfied is learning how to rejoice. So, And I think then at this point, it's important to celebrate that we're on a path that leads to being upright and dignified, and we can feel some pride in being a human being that is acting in some dignified way, that is upright, doesn't cut corners, it has is trying to be have personal integrity, that actually cares about ethical behavior, is trying to, live a life that's meaningful and help others. So there's a lot of power in living by aspiration. So the traditional aspiration is, may I and others never be separated from the great happiness that is devoid of suffering. You might replace happiness with joy. So you find in this practice that you're abiding in a wide open, unbiased nature of mind that actually allows everything in. Not picking and choosing so much, not judging. And there's some basic goodness here you're appreciating in yourself and others. So stop second guessing yourself. That's what it means in the Heart Sutra when it says Prajnaparamita is, there's a place towards the end of the sutra where it says no hesitation. No hesitation. You're just on the spot, moment by, this is our life, moment by moment. It's not some other moment. And now it's this moment. We have a koan, what's the last word of Zen? What's the last word of Zen? Huh? Moo? Now it is. Not. Moo. It's our life, moment by moment, everything's changing. There's nothing stays the same. And we're hanging on. So the aspiration that might, if that aspiration of being devoid of suffering is too big, you can reduce it down to a relative bodhicitta aspiration, which would be something like, may I not others never be separated from wellness, health, basic goodness, spiritual friends, sangha, family, community, right? Little doable things. Do things that are doable. You don't have to do the big absolute bodhicitta all the time. Do something simple. The aspiration can move and shift based on your context or your frame of mind. And then again, you can always do these in the 7-step formula that we do in loving kindness, or you start close to home, and then you generate this rejoicing and celebrating other people's victories and their pleasure and their happiness. And you start with people you love and your friends, your family, neutral people, the person behind the cash register. And then you of course, then you always, you do it for the people you don't like. And if you can do this, you start to become a bigger container. You can have some sense of dignity as a human being, that you actually can be bigger. You don't have to be small-minded. You're big enough to actually accommodate people that have treated you poorly. That's kind of what forgiveness is about, is you actually choose to forgive someone that doesn't deserve your forgiveness. You have every right to be angry that someone mistreated you, but you also know, because you have some practice here, that if that anger takes up residency in your heart, you're going to become bitter and dried up, and you don't want to be like that. So you make a choice. Well, I'm not going to, the real forgiveness is when you finally get that I'm not going to wish harm on that person. I'm actually going to get over that, because secretly you are, right? You would like their house to burn down. You would celebrate it. You wouldn't tell anyone, but you would celebrate it if their house burned down. You would do that. See, oh yeah, they finally got what was coming to them. But that's not what we're doing here. I'm glad you're all laughing, because we can all relate to it. Remember, forgiveness is a choice. You don't have to forgive that asshole. You absolutely do not have to do it. It's your life. Live your life the way you want to. If being pissed off all the time at them and being happy when their house burned down works for you, go ahead, do it. Knock yourself out. And then the final Brahma Vihara is equanimity. Equanimity. And equanimity is important here because it actually balances out the first three. So the mind slogan here is train without bias in all areas. It's critical always to do this pervasively and wholeheartedly. So we're bearing witness in this way with equanimity. You're not attached to an outcome. Begin to widen your circle of understanding until you get to the edge. And on the other side of that edge is whatever is other for you, whatever is not familiar to you, people, a group, whatever. And we all have an edge somewhere, and you just keep widening that out to include that what you used to be other for you becomes you. So equanimity is important because the first three Brahma Viharas are still kind of limited by liking and disliking, accepting and rejecting, but equanimity doesn't do this at all. There was a story about there was a certain Zen master, whenever he was asked how he was, he'd say, I'm okay. And then finally one of his students asked him one day, said, Roshi, don't you ever have a bad day? And he said, sure I do. And then he said, on bad days, I'm okay. On good days, I'm okay too. That's equanimity. There's a story about Suzuki Roshi. And before I tell this, I have to say I'm a little sad that I'm not able to be with you as much as I would be in a Sesshin, because I'm being very careful about my health for an operation, but I miss eating with you. I feel a little bad going back to my office to eat when you're all eating together, but there it is. So this is a story about Suzuki Roshi, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. And he was the abbot and wonderful, great Zen teacher that came to the West, started the San Francisco Zen Center. And he loved to eat in the dining room with the students. They have a big dining room there. And then towards the end of his life, he got diagnosed with some illness. The doctors, I don't remember what the name of what the diagnosis was, but the doctor said it could be catching. So he came home and he was really sad. He told his wife, I've got this illness. I'm probably going to die from it. But the worst thing is I can't be in the cafeteria with my students. Yeah. And then he went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, I made a mistake. It's not catching. You have cancer, and you're going to die from it. But it's not catching. And he goes home, and he's really happy. This is his wife. Hey, I don't have my disease isn't catching. I can go and be in the cafeteria with him. I have cancer, and I'm dying. That's equanimity. That's really equanimity. Wow. Yeah. So the image of equanimity is that you're at a banquet table and everyone's invited. Everyone, without exception, unconditional. invitations to everybody, everyone you've ever pissed off, everyone you ever, all your enemies, the people that, everyone. That's equanimity. It's like when we do the Gated Sweet Nectar service, we invite all the hungry ghosts to come and be here with us. Every one, and they're not all beautiful people. Some of them smell, some of them act crazy. That's equanimity. So, the Native Americans have at least they have a phrase "Teoshpaye," which means "all my kin." It's a wonderful kind teaching that they really think of everyone as their kin. And so this isn't just people, this is animals, and chipmunks, and birds, and trees, and everything. Everything is Teoshpaye, my kin. So that's it's probably enough for today. We could have any discussion you want. It says 1 o'clock. That's not right. 12 o'clock, right? Confused. Well, get the microphone.
So you mentioned earlier on in the talk that we have is people's propensity for self-deception.
Yeah.
What can you say about working with that, or how do you know if you're lying to yourself? How do you know you're lying to yourself? How do you?
Well, prajna lets you know. Because you're practicing, prajna is already part of your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So prajna is another way of speaking of prajna is it's an intelligence that it's not self-referential. So the way we solidify our ego is by constantly referencing ourselves in some way. But then you make this discovery in practice, there's another kind of intelligence called prajna, which is not self-referential. The Dharma doesn't care about your ego. It doesn't care about whatever your agenda is. And that's something you can rely on because it doesn't rely on your agenda. It doesn't. And so you begin to the degree that you trust the Dharma, that much you're free of self-deception. If you don't trust the Dharma and you don't trust prajna, then you're going to be subject to quite a lot of self-deception because the ego is very slippery, easy to fool ourselves. But the beauty of this practice is that when you discover prajna and you have some commitment to that because it's true in a way that other things aren't, then you commit to that because you have some integrity in you that is wanting what's true, and that's aspirational. You want to live a life that is meaningful about, and not just you want to live it's a reckoning. It's like you die before you die. You sort of waking up. You wake up now, and then you begin to the degree you trust the Dharma, that degree you're free of that self-deception, I think, because the prajna is going to catch you when you do it. You might not always get it right away, but at some point you're going to notice it's a little fishy what I'm doing. And then you can choose to keep doing it, or you can, or not. I'm not suggesting that because we have a commitment to the Dharma, that we become perfect human beings and we don't have self-deception, but less, a little less, moving in that direction. You take the precepts, you do Jukai, and everyone witnesses it. You make a commitment. So not only do you have prajna, you have your sangha, your spiritual friends in your community, who can also hold your feet to the fire when you start acting like an asshole. They'll let you know. They will. if they're true friends, so they'll tell you when you're doing something that's off.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, you can.
I hope this question doesn't come across as splitting hairs.
That's all right.
I'm trying to understand. I feel a tension between aspiration and this idea of living by vow, but aspiration and like craving or desire to be other than what is, like not settling into what is or accepting. It's a tension between aspiration and acceptance.
Can you say a little more? You mean like wanting to change something in yourself that is off?
Yeah.
Bad habits?
Yeah, versus which, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's an absolute line here between having affirmations to change habits and aspiration, but I do think they are different to some degree, because the affirmation is a kind of like a New Year's resolution. It might take and it might not. But the aspiration is continual. It's always there. And it's giving you some feedback about that habit, and you're noticing it's not really serving you. And there's no guarantees here that just because we take a vow to be bodhisattvas that we're all of a sudden going to stop all our bad habits. So, but I do think it works organically over time in some ways. Yeah. There's no insurance policy for Zen. So, like Trungpa told me once, he said, "Good luck." I had come all the way from Los Angeles to study with Trungpa in Boulder, and there was a long line after a workshop with him, and he had told me to come to Boulder, so I came, to study with him, and I'm waiting in this line after all these people want to see him, and I had all this time to think up a really intelligent question. I don't remember what it was. I got up to Trungpa, and I asked him this question. He looks at me, he picks his nose. There's this long pause. He looks at me with this shit-eating grin on his face, and he just says, "Good luck." I feel so stupid and embarrassed, This is not a good start. You're supposed to be my spiritual teacher. You're supposed to say something nice to me. I mean, this is not what I wanted. Yeah. No insurance policy. It's really up to you. It's up to each of us to make those kind of discernments. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, I think it's time for lunch then. Okay.